All right. Good afternoon and happy whatever day it is. I think Tuesday today. Um, and I just want to take a moment and give a warm welcome to the 30 young journalists from the Rima Al Farah Memorial Journalism Fellowship. Some of whom are joining us today virtually. This year's group will be with us through early October. And as you recall, the program was named in honor of our colleague Riyam Al Farah, who at the age of 29 was killed in the terrorist attack on the UN compound on August 19th, 2003. So we welcome all of them and look forward to working with them. This afternoon, the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, will speak in person at the closing of the 74th General Assembly. He will also speak at the first plenary meeting of the 75th General Assembly. Then tomorrow at noon, the Secretary General will the Secretary General will speak to you in the press briefing room as an opener to the 75th session, and that press conference, as you would expect, will replace our briefing. And earlier today, the Secretary General laid a wreath in memory of the organization's second Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, who died 59 years ago in a plane crash. The Secretary General said he welcomed the General Assembly's resolution passed in December of last year to continue the inquiry into the causes of that plane crash. We have responsibility to all the victims and their loved ones to learn the truth of what happened. The Secretary General reiterated his personal commitment to that quest. And he added that today Dag Hammarskjöld's words and vision are more timely than ever as COVID-19 pandemic has upended our world. The Secretary General said, we have once again seen that international solidarity is no longer a choice, but an obligation. And as a reminder, the president of the 75th General Assembly will hold a press briefing at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. It'll be a hybrid briefing, and he will be in the press briefing room. And I've received a question about the situation in Cameroon, and I can say that the Secretary General strongly condemns the suicide bombing last week in the border village of Zeleved in the far north region of the country. He expresses his deep sympathies to the families of the victims and the government and people of Cameroon. It is essential to hold those responsible for the attack to account. The Secretary General reiterates the United Nations' unwavering support for the countries of the Lake Chad Basin in their collective fight against Boko Haram and other terrorist organizations, as well as their efforts to address the security, humanitarian, and socioeconomic needs of affected populations. He calls on the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, with the support of the broader international community, to maintain their resolve and find a sustainable solution to the crisis and address its root causes. Turning to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, the special envoy for that country, briefed Security Council members by video conference this morning, and he told them that increased fighting, greater humanitarian needs, and the COVID-19 pandemic are still taking their toll on Yemen. Now is the time for the parties to swiftly conclude negotiations to finalize the joint declaration, he told members of the council. He urged the parties to choose peace, end this conflict, and work with the UN urgently on the joint declaration. He added that the current situation in Marib is concerning in a number of ways, with a high level of loss of life and a real threat to hundreds of thousands of displaced people and people in need. In Hudaida, meanwhile, reports of ceasefire violations continue daily, he added, saying that the UN mission to support the Hudaida agreement continues to experience restriction that hampers the mission's work. For his part, Mark Lowcock, the emergency relief coordinator, who also briefed the council, warned that the specter of famine has returned to Yemen, adding that he is deeply concerned that the Ansar Allah authorities have closed Sana'a airport and to UN and humanitarian flights. Regarding the safer oil tanker, Mr. Lowcock said the UN team has submitted a revised proposal for the assessment and initial repair mission and held several rounds of constructive technical discussions with the de facto authorities. Frustrating as the endless delays have been, he added, we are not giving up, and we hope the new proposal will be quickly approved so the work can start. Yesterday, 36 people were rescued by ship from a UNIFIL maritime task force. They were transferred to Lebanese Armed Forces Beirut Naval Base During the trip back to Beirut, the 36 individuals were provided with immediate assistance. The Maritime Task Force has rescued 21 men, 10 women, including one pregnant woman and 5 children, one of them in critical condition. Turning to neighboring Syria, our humanitarian colleagues there report that yesterday, unknown armed men reportedly attacked a Turkish Red Crescent vehicle near the Al-Bab town in the northern part of Aleppo governorate, killing an aid worker and wounding another. We condemn any attacks against humanitarian workers and remind all parties and those with influence over the parties of their obligations to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure as required by international human rights law and international humanitarian law. And you will have seen a joint statement we issued earlier this morning, a statement by the Secretary General, it's a joint statement by the Secretary General and the Secretary General of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, Stanislav Zas. They jointly welcome the steady progress and positive dynamic in the strengthening of relations between the secretariats of the two organizations in the 10 years since the signing of the Joint Declaration on Cooperation. They also noted the importance of cooperation in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter, international law, to advance global and regional peace and security. As the International commemorates the 75th anniversary of the UN, the Secretaries General reiterated their strong commitment to the Joint Declaration and their intention to further enhance the scope of cooperation at all levels. These include key areas such as early warning, conflict prevention, resolution, peacekeeping, and preventing and countering terrorism, and the fight against international crime and illicit arms trafficking, as well as disaster preparedness and response, and information sharing. That statement is online and was shared with you. A record 13.4 million people in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Western Niger need humanitarian assistance and protection this year, as complex and fast-growing crises continue to cause record levels of suffering in the Central Sahel region. That's according to our colleagues in the Office of Humanitarian Affairs. The numbers of internally displaced people has increased by 20, going from 70,000 to 1.4 million in less than 2 years. Compared to last year, the number of severely food insecure people has almost quintupled in Burkina Faso, almost doubled in Mali, and increased by 77% in Niger. There are now 6.6 million severely food insecure people in the region. While needs are at an all-time high, it is increasingly difficult to access vulnerable people due to insecurity, including attacks on civilians and humanitarian workers, as well as their assets. The effects of climate change are also complicating an already dramatic humanitarian situation. As of today, more than 500,000 people have been affected by floods in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The humanitarian response plans for the 3 countries, seeking $1.4 billion, is severely underfunded. A ministerial-level pledging event is scheduled for the 20th of October in Denmark. And on Somalia, the UN and our international partners welcome the resumption of dialogue between the federal governments and the 5 federal member states. We urge all Somali leaders to engage fully in serious dialogue aimed at reaching broad agreement on credible and implementable electoral models. We also appeal to Somalia's leaders to be guided by the national interest and the democratic aspirations of the Somali people at the historic moment. The full statement is online. And we have an update on what we are doing to address the COVID-19 pandemic in Timor-Leste. The UN team, led by the resident coordinator, Roy Trivedi, has mobilized $18 million to respond to the pandemic and provided essential medical supplies, including 180,000 masks, 100,000 items of personal protection equipment. That was done through the World Health Organization. And through 7 World Food Program charter flights, more than 300 aid workers and nearly 4 tons of life-saving goods have been transported in the past 2 months. We're also rolling out back-to-school campaigns with messages on hand washing, social distancing, and ensuring continued learning, with nearly all schools having reopened to date. The UN Children's Fund is delivering 13,000 hand washing buckets for schools and led UN efforts to collect data on food and nutrition. We've also focused on preventing violence against women and girls as part of the Spotlight Initiative, and UN agencies are working together to assess the impact of the pandemic on livelihoods. In Myanmar, the World Food Program, turning to Myanmar, The World Food Program tells us they've signed an agreement with the government in Rakhine State to provide short-term food aid at quarantine centers in 8 townships. Since mid-August 2020, Rakhine State has seen an increase in local transmission of COVID-19. As of September 10th, some 1,500 people are under quarantine at government-managed centers across the state. The agency stands ready to expand its support, if necessary, to government efforts as it deals with food and nutrition needs for the people of Rakhine and elsewhere in Myanmar. Turning to Greece, the UN Refugee Agency said today it is stepping up its support to help 11,000 asylum seekers who are without adequate shelter after the Moria Reception and Identification Center burned down last week on the island of Lesbos. Greek authorities have identified a location on the island to temporarily house the most vulnerable. UNHCR is helping to set up the new temporary tented facility and has provided 600 family tents, chemical toilets, and hand washing station. For its part, the International Migration Agency is calling on European states and the EU to both urgently support the immediate shelter and other needs, while also finding longer-term solutions rooted in European solidarity. And today, the fashion industry charter convened by the UN Climate Change Secretariat released a playbook to help business in the fashion industry take climate action. The playbook is primarily intended for less experienced fashion companies that have not yet taken action on climate change, but want to join the sector to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. The playbook is also valuable for more experienced companies as they need to bring their suppliers along in the journey. The fashion sector, as you know, is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions and face growing risks from increasing emissions and the resulting change in the climate, such as water scarcity, facilities and infrastructure threatened by more frequent and severe climate events, price volatility, raw materials, and much more. You can find more information on the UNFCCC website. And our friends in Madrid at the World Tourism Organization said today that international tourist arrivals dropped 65% during the first half of this year. This represents an unprecedented decrease as countries around the world close their borders and introduce travel restrictions in response to the pandemic. According to the UNWTO, the massive drop in international travel translates into a loss of 440 million international arrivals, or about $460 billion in export revenues from international tourism. They've also noted over the recent weeks a growing number of destinations have started to open up again to international tourists. As of early September, 53% of destinations had eased travel restrictions, but many governments remain cautious. And today is the International Day of Democracy, something we like. In a message for the day, the Secretary General said that as the world confronts the pandemic, democracy is crucial for ensuring the free flow of information, participation in decision-making, accountability for the response to the pandemic. Yet since the beginning of the crisis, we have seen seen the emergency used in a range of countries to restrict the democratic processes in civic space. The Secretary General noted this is especially dangerous in places where democracy's roots are shallow and institutional checks and balances are weak. He added that the crisis is also highlighting and aggravating long-neglected injustices that have along with the profound human toll, these inequalities are themselves a threat to democracy. And since this is a democratic briefing, I will entertain some questions. So let's see. James Bays, please go ahead.
Yes, Steph, I have some questions on Libya. There are reports that the new UN envoy for Libya will be Mr. Nikolai Mladenov. Can you confirm that he is going to take that job?
No. That's the short answer. The longer answer, as always, when there is jockeying for, when there are posts opened, there are all sorts of rumors flying around. I think we have to wait for the usual procedure to take place. What I can tell you is that Ms. Stephanie Williams remains and actively remains the acting SRSG, and there will not be a leadership vacuum at the head of the mission.
Are you confident that that post will be filled very soon?
I've been here slightly longer than you, and expressing confidence when there's a process that involves others besides the Secretary General as to the timing, I won't opine.
Okay, couple more follow-ups.
But what I will tell you is that for his part, the Secretary General is working as quickly as possible on this. And of course, we do have to wait for the resolution to pass if it hasn't already done so.
Couple more follow-ups on Libya. We remember when the Secretary General took office that he said Libya was one of his priorities and he hoped would be one of the things that he would be able to solve first. Clearly that wasn't the case. He was thwarted at that stage. He was thwarted again when General Haftar marched on Tripoli. It became a priority again this year with the Berlin process. Again, that fell apart. Now you have a new UNSMIL resolution. Does he see this as a new start and a new push by the international community on Libya?
Look, for his part, he's continued to push. We have been disappointed by what we've seen on the ground, by the continued fighting. The Secretary General and his representatives, I think, have been very vocal in their disappointment at the flagrant and blatant violations of the arms embargo in Libya. We will continue to push and remain realistic.
Okay, the last one, if I can, with regard to Libya, and it's gone completely out of my mind what I was going to ask. So why don't you go to someone else, and I'll come back with you.
All right, James. Nabil.
Yes, thank you, Stéphane, and good to see you again. What's your comment or the Secretary General's comment on the signing of new agreements or treaties between Israel and Arab countries in Washington today, please?
Well, I mean, I think for the Secretary General, I think it's been very clear that he hopes these agreements will enable the Palestinians and the Israelis to renew negotiations. He also hopes, obviously, will be a new opportunity to develop regional stability in the Gulf. And I would also refer you to the statements he's made about the issue related to annexation. Rick Gladstone.
Hi, Steph, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I have a question about the General Assembly. Has there been an assessment made of how much money, if any, is being saved through the virtual General Assembly or all of the meetings that will be held, not physically?
No, it's as any question with the UN, it's a complicated answer because on one hand, it's easy to imagine there's some staff costs saved by overtime on security and so forth. Probably, I have to check. I assume fewer interpreters because there are fewer side meetings extra interpreters having to be hired. That being said, there are costs that we've been encouraged due to the high level of cleaning and disinfecting that we do on a regular basis. And obviously, this is a big hit for a host city, for the hotel, car services, all the people that supply services to the UN, to visiting delegations, to visiting journalists. So it's, we don't see it as a positive money-saving measure for us. And obviously, the big loss will be the human interaction of diplomacy, the side events, the side discussions, and the bilateral meetings that won't be happening.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. James Bays, is the brain restarted?
The brain has been found again. So back to Libya, there are reports that Prime Minister Sarraj is planning to resign and stay on in a caretaker role in order to allow some space, I think, ahead of the UN's proposed political talks. What is the Secretary General's reaction to that? And does he think it would be helpful, given how polarized and difficult things have become, if General Haftar also was to step down to allow the country for new unified leadership?
We're not going to comment on these. I mean, I saw the press reports. I saw the Bloomberg piece this morning and others. We're not going to comment at this point. Okay, Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Going back to Nabil's question, how could the SG interpret this agreement as opening new opportunities for peace in the Middle East, when this agreement emboldened Israel to expedite annexation, threatened the Palestinians that there will be no Palestinian state, and even Netanyahu, before he departed to Washington, threatened that he will throw out the Palestinians who came after 1993 Oslo agreement to make peace with Israel, and he said he could send them back out of the country. So don't you see that this agreement will embolden Israel and will increase its aggressiveness against the Palestinians?
For the Secretary General, he continues to hope that Israelis, the Palestinian leaders, will re-engage in meaningful negotiations that will end the occupation, that will realize a two-state solution in line with all the UN resolutions. That is, for the Secretary General, the only path forward. Okay, Iftikhar.
Thanks, Steph. Good to see you in a sweater today. My question is that we heard the Mr. Griffith's reports on Yemen, but not a word about the oil tanker which is about to explode, as we are told, and which threatens the regional countries.
Iftikhar, the thing I like to do the least is to contradict you,
Okay.
but I did mention what Mr. Lowcock had said about the tanker, and he referred to it extensively in his remarks, which we shared with you.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's okay. That's okay. All right. If anybody else has a question, wave or open your mics, because I don't see anything in the chat. Okay. Seeing none, hearing none, we will see you tomorrow for the SG's press briefing. And do remember the PGA's press briefing, the new President of the General Assembly, his press briefing. All right. Take care.